Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Annie from Bloom. Thank you so much for joining me. In today's video, we are going to start block printing on fabric using the block that we carved in our previous videos. I'm going to show you how to do layout, how to position the block in a really pleasing way that will give you a lovely finished pattern. If you haven't done so already and are interested, please consider subscribing to my channel where I will teach you everything you need to know about how to block print from home. So let's get started. Okay, we have all of our supplies and we're ready to start block printing. A little trick that I do before I actually put my block onto fabric is I like to create this sort of paper sample, if you will. All I do is I take my block, put it on a stamp pad and stamp it onto some paper and then cut this out. And I'll usually make between 5 and 10 of these. And this just helps me decide the final layout of my design before I start printing it onto fabric. So I can play around with it and just, figure out what I like, how I feel, if I feel like this looks pleasing or not. There's kind of no right or wrong answer. It's whatever you think looks nice. But just to go over some, just basic patterns, this is called a full drop repeat. It is when you have a design that is directly on top of the other. So sort of stacked on top of one another in these nice, neat rows. So this is called a full drop repeat. It's really popular. You see it in a lot of commercial designs, and it can work well. Another popular one is called a half drop repeat, and it's basically where the next vertical row just sort of drops by about half, so like this. And this is also a really nice, pleasing design. It sort of gives the appearance of movement. But my favorite for this particular print is a brick pattern repeat. And so it's similar to the half drop repeat, except that it's not on the vertical, it's on the horizontal. So it doesn't, so we're going to move these back up. Everything's going to shift over by half horizontally. So you can see here how it's similar, but it's just on the horizontal as opposed to the vertical. So I think for this particular design, I'm going to do a brick pattern repeat. And that's when these stencils, stamped stencils come in handy, because you can really figure out how exactly you want your print to look before you go ahead and jump into the final process. So now that I've decided on my layout, something that can be helpful is some people like to make, a grid or some lines to help them, figure out where their blocks are going to go. In this case, I'm actually just going to be using the stamp as my guide. So one thing I like to do, especially if I'm working on a smaller piece of fabric like this one, this is just a scrap, but is I like to start in the middle. And that helps me I want to be able to see as much of the print as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure the width of my fabric, which is about 7 inches, and I'm just going to measure the half point, which is 3.5. Put a mark right there with a fabric pen, and then this is where I'm going to start. This is where I'm going to put my first block, right like that. So I have my colors here. I have spring green, and in the previous video we made the color petal, so I'm going to be using these two colors. You can see from my stamp that I'm actually going to be doing 2 different stamps. So there's one here and there's one here. My tulip is going to be petal, and this little half circle at the bottom is going to be spring green. So that's when these little tools come into handy. These little spatulas is great for scooping out the ink. So I'm going to take the ink out and lay it here on my plexiglass. And I do that, I just sort of do kind of a line of ink at the top, like this. And I kind of spread it out like this, just, stir it up, make sure the colors haven't separated too much. And if I feel like it's a little bit thick, I might mist it with just a touch of water. This looks okay, but I prefer it to just be a little bit on the, just a hint bit more watery. I find that I just like that look a little bit better, but you play around with it. So here's my color. And then remember I told you about that flat-topped spatula? This is why it is so great, because look, you can just push the color back this way. You can't really do that with a rounded top. See, it just kind of makes lines. So this flat-topped spatula is so helpful. It's so convenient. Okay, so now I'm ready to take my squeaky roller, this foam roller, and I'm just going to tap it into the ink like this. I'm not going to pull down through the ink. I'm going to tap it this way, starting at the bottom and moving up gently. Getting as much ink on there as I possibly can. And you will find, too, that you're going to get, you know, you're not going to get the best coverage when you first roll the brayer into the ink. So that is when I use the spatula, this wonderful flat top spatula, and I kind of just rub it onto my brayer like this. This works really well for me. And I just make sure that I get color all over it like this. Saturating it as much as I can. So pretty good coverage. And then we're going to roll it back onto the plexiglass. And what you're looking for is a sticky sound. So it's hard to hear it over the squeaking, but if you listen, hear that sound? It's a sticky, sort of a tacky sound. And that is how you know that your ink is exactly, has the proper amount of coverage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my block and I'm going to roll it up and down, side to side, diagonally, getting as much coverage as I possibly can. Now, I never put my first stamp onto my final fabric. I find that I need to test it out a little bit first to make sure that the coverage is good. It usually just needs about maybe 2 go around. So you can see that there's not a ton of coverage. And that's okay. But I have found that doing this a few times sort of preps the block. And so you want an even distribution of ink. I think you can see how that looks on there. I'm going to do a second one, pressing on there with the palm of my hand right on the block. This is why I like to mount it onto a piece of wood, is because I find it really helps me get a nice even pressure on the block. I just press it down like that. And you can see that my second one came out much better. There's a lot more coverage there. So I just did 2. I think I'm ready to go. And remember, I'm going to be doing a brick pattern repeat. So I'm going to do the top row first, starting at the top in the center. And that's the really wonderful thing about block printing, is that it doesn't have to be perfect. And remember, every time you put the stamp down, it's going to look a little bit different. A little bit more coverage there. It's going to look a little bit different, and that's what I love so much about this. Just about the center. Sometimes I'll draw lines on the back of my block, so I can kind of get an idea for this is where the center of the stamp is vertically, this is where the center is horizontally. Giving some nice even pressure. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead, do the next one right next to it. So because I want them very closely close together, I actually want the edges to be touching. I'm going to make sure, I'm going to look kind of on the side of my stamp while I push it down to make sure that this edge is touching this edge here. There we go. do this side over here. Make sure that this edge is touching this edge here. Nice even pressure, pressing down a few times, just like that. All right, that is just about my first row. And you can see that I still need to finish this side. So yes, it's going to go off the edge here, and that's why you have this nice scrap towel down, because it won't matter. There we go. Do the other side here. Just like that. Pressing down. Okay, so our first row is completed. Now before I do the second row, I want to add on this little half circle here in spring green. So I'm going to go ahead, here's my spring green. I'm going to go ahead and put the spring green down here at the bottom of my plexiglass. I kind of, depending on the print, sometimes I like to do one color all at once, or I like to change up the colors as I go. And because I'm doing a half block, excuse me, a brick pattern repeat, I actually need to have the completed tulip in order to know where to position the next row. So for example, I need this little nub here to know exactly where to position the edge of the petals for the next row. So that's why I'm going to go ahead. I'll use this little sponge. And here's my little tiny half circle stamp. For tiny stamps, I like to use, you know, these little sponges. But I also have to be careful because sometimes they can create some noise, as I discussed in a previous video. And remember, noise is just sort of some ink that gets, you know, around the stamp. Some people really like that look. So there's no right or wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and put that half circle right there. And there we go. I really like this spring green. Green is actually my favorite color. I definitely gravitate towards it. I think it's a very, it can be a cheery color, but it can also be very calming. I'm just about done here. And when you get to these edges, it can be a little tricky to know kind of where to place it, but just eyeball it. Remember, that's what's so much fun about block printing, is that it is not about perfection. Oh, we don't need one over there. So it's not about perfection. This is about something beautiful that you have made. It's made by hand, so there's going to be imperfection in it. And that should be celebrated. It should be embraced. So you can see here that my paint's starting to get a little thin, and I can do a few things. The first thing I can do is I can put more ink down here, you know, on the plexiglass, which I will probably have to do. But the first thing that I like to do is I just like to sort of scrape up the ink that I have down here from rolling it around on my plexiglass. And then just making another nice little neat line. Well, as neat as possible at the top. And then you actually can get a surprising amount of ink just from doing that. There's that. There we go. So create that. This line there. All right, remember, tap, tap, tap. Getting the roller nice and coated. Looking for that sticky sound. I hear it over the squeaking. All right, coating my block again, just like this. You can look at the block, make sure it's got nice even coverage. If you happen to see some of these, you know, this debris, I don't really care. It's sometimes just a piece of fuzz or a piece of dried ink. You can pull that out and then, you know, just go back over it like this. And then remember, because I'm doing the brick pattern repeat, I want my next tulip to be in between these two tulips here. So in between the top row. So this edge is going to match right underneath this little green half circle. And then this edge will match right, or will touch right underneath this green half circle. So I'm going to look, I'm going to get down next to it, make sure it's lined up. press that down. Okay. I'll do my next row, or my next tulip. Do the same thing. And there we go. Do one more. Just like that. Okay, and then just to sort of finish up this sample, I'm gonna just do a few more of these spring green half circles. Just like that. There really is just no end to what you can create and design with block printing. It's such a relaxing, enjoyable activity. So here you can see, I'll hold it up so you guys can see. This is sort of what the coverage, this is what my coverage looks like. I can see I have a little bit of noise right there, but that's okay. Right all around here, you can see ever so slightly just some of the fibers, the white sort of peeking through the ink. One of the questions that I had when I was starting to block print was, is this right? Does this look the way it's supposed to? It's going to look a little bit different depending on the fabric that you use. Because linen is a nubbier fabric, you're going to get a little bit less coverage than if you use like a fine cotton weave. I personally really love the look of linen. I kind of like that there's not this deep saturated coverage. I think it just sort of adds a little bit more character to it. But there's not, you know, it's just kind of, it's up to you what look you're going for. But yes, this is how mine looks. So yeah, you can kind of see in there. And then here I completed a repeat of my tulip. So this is sort of my one of my final samples. I'm pretty happy with this print. I really like how it turned out. I actually did another sample in a different colorway. Let's see if I can grab it here. This is my binder. I keep track of, you know, all my samples and whatnot. But here you have, I did a periwinkle with a tomato. So it's really fun to play around with colors. And even though you have the same shapes going on, it really changes the look and the feel of the print depending on which colors that you choose. So I'll probably do this in a couple different colorways. I'll probably try it in a yellow, maybe with a pink, possibly a turquoise, maybe with an ochre. So we'll see. The last thing that I want to add, now that you have finished block printing your fabric, you're going to want to let this dry for probably about a day or so. And after you've done that, after it's nice and dry, you can flip it over and with a hot, dry iron, steam off. You can iron the back side. You know, just iron it for a couple of seconds to make sure that the heat has set the ink. Because this Speedball screen printing ink has to be heat set in order to be color fast. I have tested it out and washed some pieces that I did not heat set, and it, you know, it still stuck to the fabric decently, but it definitely faded quite a bit. When you heat set it, it'll keep that color a lot more vibrant and bold. So heat setting is really important. I have also heat set it on the right side of the fabric, so I've ironed it right over, you know, the top of my print, and I haven't had any issues with that at all. One thing to keep in mind is that you need to know the type of fabric that you're using. So for example, if you're using a cotton, then you would put the iron onto the cotton setting, which is a high setting. If you're using something like a silk, you would obviously need to lower it a little bit. Now this is linen, and you can kind of see here, I actually burned it with my iron. My iron was really, really hot and I left it on there for too long. So be mindful of that. Keep the iron moving. You don't want to leave it sitting in one spot for too long because your fabric can burn. So the final step in all of this is to wash your supplies. It is better to wash them right away as opposed to just letting it sit out for it to dry. You don't really want to do that. It's all water soluble. Cleanup is pretty easy. That's why I like working with the Speedball water-based inks, because cleanup is so easy and convenient. I don't really need to use anything. I just like to use a little bit of water. Sometimes I'll use a gentle, old soft toothbrush to kind of clean out my stamps. And then I just, leave it out to dry. So make sure you clean your stuff up right away. Otherwise, cleanup will be just a little bit more challenging. Until next time, I will see you all later, and I hope you join me for more future block prints. Take care.